course, that was just a brief snapshot of the handful of nearly 20,000 learners who have completed micro-credentials across the 8 partner universities involved in the project. And I think it's powerful to hear the real world impact that microcreds are having on lifelong learning and people looking to advance their careers and upskill themselves, but do it in a way that suits them, that is flexible, and that suits their lives and that suits their work life as well, in order to see their ambitions through. And this is a theme that we're looking to explore further with our first panel discussion. So let me introduce these 3 on stage here today. Sean Davis, Head of Leadership, Talent and Skills at Enterprise Ireland. And Sean is a globally experienced business leader with a 27-year track record spanning international trade, government and high-growth commercial environments. Orla Bannon. Orla is Director of Careers at Trinity College, Dublin, and in this role, she has responsibility for managing the scale and quality of academic and student engagement with careers, as well as partnerships with employers. And she's also the Director of Trinity's Micro-Credentials program, so she's very well placed to talk about the impact that it's having in the university and beyond. And Ken Finnegan. Ken is Chief Strategy Officer at Skillnet Ireland, where he leads the organisation's skills, investments and partner strategy. In this role, he works closely with the European Commission. He works with higher education institutions, government departments, business and enterprise groups and agencies, and both international and Indigenous companies. You're very well connected, Ken. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us for this first panel discussion of the day. And Ken, I will come to you first, because from Skillnet Ireland's vantage point, and that's what you're all about, it's all about upskilling so that people are best placed to work well in various environments. Where are you seeing the most acute skills gaps emerging across Irish enterprise today? And how do you see MicroCreds positioned to respond to those needs?
Well, first of all, congratulations to everybody in the room here today. It is a great success. I'm just in Skillnet 6 months, but I was in Trinity working with Orla previously, so I was sitting around the table 4 years ago, 5 years ago, as part of these conversations. So congratulations, everybody. Well done. I hope you're very proud. So I guess from a Skillnet perspective, we're seeing skills needs and requirements across kind of like, they're going to be a little bit obvious, but digitization and artificial intelligence, there's a lot of requirements and needs in and around the sustainability kind of like sectors and green sectors as well. And if I was to dig a little deeper, like digital health, med tech, renewable energy. For maybe to add some context and colour to that, in terms of our applications last year's from our Skillnet networks and industry community, from a digital and AI perspective, 63% of all applications that came in last year from our Skillnet networks included some form of AI requirements. So we're kind of seeing a big, I don't want to say shift, but a response, if you want, to the kind of like the disruption that's happening in the context of AI. And we're not just seeing that from a tech perspective, but we're seeing it from across all different sectors as well.
People want to be clued in, don't they?
People want to be clued in. They want to kind of like, it's like, I don't want to say it's this idea of fear of missing out, but it's like, what are the opportunities and what will AI bring to them? As I said, across multiple different sectors as well, or across all sectors actually, not just multiple sectors. Another interesting one, we do respond to government policy as well, and another area that's kind of like pretty interesting is the construction area as well. It's like by 2030, I think we have a commitment of hiring 120,000 new employees in the construction sector and upskilling 140,000 people. So there's direct responses from Skillnet and our networks and schemes to this. And again, the micro-credentials that are available from, like, for example, the Modern Methods of Construction Academy, it's a single entry point for the construction industry in Ireland, let's say. They provide industry and companies with those kind of like everything that we understand as the benefits of micro-credentials, so flexible learning, kind of like bite-sized chunks, etc., which are proven to be very positive.
And important, especially in the construction sector, say. So it fits the needs of sectors.
I think it's I can list off. I have a list here of all the different sectors, but actually we have 70 networks around the country, and the majority of those networks have some form of micro-credential courses on them as well. So we're well kind of like we're catering for the needs of industry and the needs of the multiple different sectors. And maybe I'll give you a kind of like just a flavour of some of them. Micro-credentials in climate action and sustainability. We've energy leaders, the waste and circular economy leaders, sustainability leaders program, which are all MicroCreds. Modern methods of construction, which I've mentioned. Electric vehicle fundamentals, again, if people are kind of like interesting and in getting involved in or getting into that sector, there's career pathways kind of like for them to participate in and participate on those micro-credentials. With Trinity, I know we have a micro-credentials in motion picture engineering, spatial audio and XR, food and drink obviously, and biopharmaceuticals. So there's a kind of like a broad span of offerings, let's say, from the Skillnet networks, sectorally and also from a regional perspective as well. So there's something there essentially for everybody.
Yeah, and interesting how it is so, focused in the areas, the key areas where this upskilling is required across the country. Orla, from your perspective, working within a university, but with a focus on building careers, how are employer expectations around skills and upskilling? How's that changing?
Well, I think what we would have seen in the past is employers very much looking for, particularly for graduates coming out, that they're ready to hit the ground and kind of ready-made in a way, and that is changing a huge amount now. As Paul referred to, there are still a lot of skills gaps out there. Hiring is very difficult for a lot of companies, so very much recruitment has moved now to looking at potential and looking at skills potential, and that the key thing that's being looked at now, we're finding by employers, is willingness to learn. So very much when they're hiring, looking to say, okay, you have the basics. Mm-hmm. You may not have exactly what we look for, particularly as Ken said, particularly in the digitalization space, things are moving so quickly. Nobody's going to come in with all the skills. But for us, we work a lot with our students and our graduates to kind of get them to articulate, their willingness to learn, their ability to learn, and their eagerness to learn. And that's where, on the micro-credential side, it really complements that, because by working with employers to say, this is the range of offerings we have, we can tailor those to the needs of the employers, so that when they say, okay, look, we're hiring a group of staff in, but we need them to upskill in this area, we can work with them to develop that skill.
You provide that pathway,
yeah.
Which is brilliant, really. I mean, are you seeing more of a move away now from qualifications and typically, what someone would emerge from third level with a set qualification, to the skills that people can actually bring to a company, given the gaps that, Ken has identified there?
We're starting to see it. I think we have to accept that qualifications are a necessity for many roles, and that's always going to be there. But we can see in the recruitment processes that companies are using a shift to more skills-based. So it's very much about, the key question now is, what can you do and how well can you do it? Mm-hmm. And I think there's an onus then on employers to really think about the recruitment methods they're using for that. Because, to assess someone's ability and skill level, you can't do that through AI. You have to have a human element to the recruitment processes. And the other thing that we're seeing, that shift more towards skills-based recruitment, and Paul referred to it there as well, it is widening the talent pool, which is a really positive thing, and it's improving access to the workplace. But as I said, to kind of really make the most of that and get the benefit of that, we have to look at our recruitment practices and how we're using those to assess those skills levels.
All right, and Sean, you've been listening to all of that, and based on Enterprise Ireland's engagement with companies, where do you see MicroCreds adding the greatest value for SMEs and scaling companies?
So first, I suppose, to admit my conscious bias here, I had 10 years in Supergreen. At least some in the room will remember Supergreen. Maybe not everybody.
You remember the sausages?
They're still available. so my conscious bias is customer centricity. When David spoke about pillar 3, the one that sort of kept him awake at night and the user at the end, it's actually the one that should keep you awake at night, because when you talk about SMEs, Michelle and Skillnet had a lot of data points in the brochure, but one that really bounced for me was 43% talk about time poorness, and that's the number one thing they said in terms of why they wouldn't pursue ongoing learning. I guarantee the other 57%, it's not the number one thing, but it's the 2 or 3 why they don't do it. So when it comes to why microcreds are so important, let's talk about the accessibility, the stackability, the scalability. That's all great. To some extent, that's foundational as well. I remember Medtronic, I lived in the States for 22 years, Medtronic, we were at a meeting with Medtronic and they said, unless you've got price, quality and compliance in place, don't even come and talk to us. They were the foundational elements of come to talk to Medtronic. So the accessibility piece is really, really important. We would have the exact same view that Skillnet have in that 43%, because we run programs, and the gap between trying to get companies onto a program and how ebullient they are after the experience. You could drive the Dublin Cork train down through the gap of that. So I think part of the challenge that I'm sure David is seeing and we're all seeing is bridging that gap between I don't have the time to do this or I have other priorities versus that was the best thing I ever did. If we can bridge the gap between those two positions, then that's going to be really important. We've said in our current strategy, which is now 1 year old, that we've all benefited hugely from multinational sector in Ireland, absolutely. But we've said that Indigenous Irish industry need to be the primary driver of the Irish economy in the future, and that to some extent inoculates us from the geopolitical sensations that are going on every day. Reality, yeah. Great news, but unnerving. But ongoing learning is going to be such an important part of that. Paul talked about emergent skills earlier on. That's it's probably to some extent it's the continuation of the mid-90s policy around the smart economy. It's just really a continuation of that. And making sure that Irish companies see that they can access what they need to access, when they need to access and how.
It's interesting that you're saying that the focus should be on Indigenous companies, because I imagine with the bigger multinationals, then they have their own skills and training programs and all of that maybe built into the model. So from Enterprise Ireland's work, where do you see those critical skill gaps in the coming years within perhaps, look, okay, it could be industry-wide, but within Indigenous companies? And how they can support, leadership roles, management roles, and all the innovation that is needed for businesses to be sustainable into the future.
So we've already touched off digitalisation, that's been mentioned earlier on, sustainability has been mentioned, so let's take them as given and just put a line under them, absolutely important. But leadership is where it begins. If you want to influence and change a company and what they're going to do and how they're going to spend their money, influence the leadership. We were always taught back in the day, back to Fergal now again, but the management to leadership spectrum of skills, plan, organise, control, very functional, think of Excel when you think about that kind of stuff, and process, communicate, delegate, motivate. They're the behavioural skills that leaders need. So, and they're the softer skills. And I think in 2021, COVID broke a couple of things and created new norms. And the new norms that were created around the softer skills around leadership, the old sort of Jack Welch school of like sort of performance driven and KPIs, important, absolutely important, but it's the softer skills, how leaders lead and how people want to be led now, which is really important, and employees are saying as well, like non-pay remuneration has become important. Work-life balance has become important, and learning and development, professional development is important. And to some extent, I believe that for the SME sector in Ireland, there's a competitive advantage. If you can't compete with multinationals on pay, how do you compete? And one of the ways that we can compete in the SME sector is through ongoing learning.
Okay, and you're nodding away there, Orla, like from a careers and employability perspective, what makes micro-credentials meaningful and credible in the eyes of enterprise?
I think what we've learned through the people in this room, and I see all the project leads sitting in front and members of the MicroCreds steering group around the room, what we've really seen is the value of, really high quality assured micro-credentials and the recognition of that by enterprise, and that's been hugely important. The other thing we've all had to look at as well, and it was referred to earlier, is to make sure that the micro-credentials that we're offering, obviously they develop skills, but those skills have to be applicable in your role, and making sure for learners that they understand what they learn by doing the micro-credential, and then giving them the opportunity, maybe through the assessment methodologies, to actually apply those in their role. And that's really important, so that employers, if they're sponsoring their staff to go on micro-credentials, can see a direct impact when they come back into the workplace. Obviously, they have to identify a very clearly identified skills need, and that's what's been very helpful working together at a national level through the MicroCreds project, is that we've been able to work together to look at what those skills needs are for the economy, to have those direct links in through the IUA, into the government, into the HEA, and to understand that and to nationally address those skills needs, so that we can make sure that we've offerings in different areas, and that kind of we're coming together and building on the research expertise that's in each of our individual universities to kind of create a unique set of micro-credential offerings. And I think the other thing from an employer perspective, and we always have to look at this, is value for money and return on investment. And I think for a lot of the enterprise partners that I've worked with through our micro-credentials program, as Sean was saying, to actually have the stories of when people go back to that's a great thing, that's the best thing I ever did. And to be able to go back and say that story, back in their company, and then that generates more to come. And that because it is an outlay from an employer to free up, particularly for SMEs, to free up a staff member's time to go and do a micro-credential and to provide the funding for that. But then the return they're getting at the other side is really, really clear. And we've lots of testimonials from companies where we've seen that impact back directly into the workplace.
It's just important to get one person in and then spread the word. I can see how that works. Ken, your networks have worked closely with MicroCreds partner universities to collaborate to come up with bespoke micro-credentials. Are they among those featured where you mentioned at the outset about particular courses that you've seen being developed in the micro-credential space? I mean, what are you looking for when you're developing these courses?
So, pretty simple answer for that one. Industry essentially tell us what they want through our networks. So we don't, at least in Skillnet, we don't assume to know anything. Let's say we listen to what industry are saying to us, what their skills needs are. So in each of our 70 networks, there's an industry representative group, if you want, and from whatever sector they represent, they're the people on the ground who understand the kind of like the talent shortages or the talent gaps that they have. So every year they'll identify those gaps, and or depending on the time frame, every 3 years. And our networks will put in requests based on those needs analysis into Skillnet HQ, and that's then we'll distribute the funding based on that. I just think, just as a kind of an interesting point to emphasize Sean's point as well, according to our talent landscape as well, 42% of companies essentially recognize that skills and skills needs are there. There's a necessity for them. However, they just don't have the time to send people. There is an outlay in terms of the cost of sending people to these programs, even though from our perspective, we do subsidize a lot of these programs up to 60% as well. So the cost of actually the program is massively subsidized by the state, let's say, with a contribution from the organizations. However, especially for SMEs, it's the cost of actually sending people. So there's kind of like, I'm really interested and excited to see the impact that from a MicroCreds perspective into the future, mainly because will this help address that kind of like that point of friction, let's say, with regards to time lost through sending staff on training courses. But you know what, it's like we're already seeing kind of like on the positive side of things, we see the positive impact as well. It is important for when staff from a company go on these courses that they come back and that the return of that investment is visible. I was up in Dundalk last week or 2 weeks ago with the minister, and there was a great story from the M1 Skillnet. They were talking about just 2 companies over 2 years that participated on Skillnet courses. And over those 2 years, those 2 companies saved approximately 3.3 million, like in terms of productivity savings. When you hear numbers like that from just 2 companies, it's kind of like you want to kind of like emphasize how important it is for companies to get involved and to make it as frictionless as possible for them to get involved. So MicroCreds I see as a kind of like a wonderful asset in our learning ecosystem to reduce that friction, but there's still things that need.
Yeah, it's worth the time, but the time taken does still provide a challenge, doesn't it, for companies, Sean? I mean, what would you say can be done as a sort of a fix on that and to promote microcreds? And how can higher education continue to ensure that microcreds are understood and they're trusted by employers every step of the way? I mean, along recruitment and progression and all of that, you know, these are key areas, and it is worth doing these. And I suppose the solution to sort of backfilling while people are doing these courses as well.
So firstly, I don't think there's anything lost by starting from the premise that they're not understood. And if you start from that premise, then you start to understand the difference. So for example, everything in that brochure is understandable, but is it understood? Is it completely understood? Is a factor of time, and getting that message across is really important. The repetition is really important. I was fortunate, I spent 5 years with age-specific breweries, or Heineken age-specific now, but the mantra we were taught was, I was the head of the US and Canada, but my boss said, if it's 2 pages to me, it's 1 page to James Wong, his boss. It's half a page to Chris Kidd, his boss, and it's 2 lines to Kopo Tiang, the CEO. And that's the way it was. That's the way you communicated. So when you're trying to get CEOs to pay attention, the communication has to be clear, repeated. It has to be what's in it for me, 100% what's in it for me. So, and that's kind of self-evident from a morale perspective. It's great when employees do course, the morale improves. Morale improves, productivity improves. Productivity improves, profitability improves. The ability to attract and retain talent when you've got a robust professional development program is obvious as well. So, but it's just that time, the amount of times, even within our own organization, when I'm trying to get a message to land, that to me is just self-evident, and like, how many times do I have to say this? And then eventually it lands, and it's just trying to get through the clutter, and that is the day.
What would be the typical pushback on microcreds, would you say, within enterprise? Where there may be a reluctance. Is it the time factor, or is it they'll get the skills on the job, or like what is it?
So we got to own it. So the time factor is there. Let's absolutely we all know that. But if you could take what I can do in a one-to-one situation in a room. So I was in with a company there a few weeks ago, actually a few weeks before Christmas, down the country, and I was talking to them about training and professional development, and in 20 minutes they were saying, we need your specialist back in here in 3 weeks, we want to talk about this, and this is great, and all the rest. But if I could turn that one-to-one engagement into a one-to-many communication, then it's won. Then we've won the race. So it's trying to turn that, what you can do on a one-to-one basis, relate to companies on their level, talk to them to some extent about those common challenges. But that's the challenge of communication, is how do you get that across on a one-to-many basis. But there are common denominators, and there is an acceptance. Like, we are the land of saints and scholars at the end of the day. We haven't drifted too far from that. Learning and the importance of learning is built into our DNA. We are storytellers as well, so we know how to do it. We just have to do it.
All right, okay, just to get there. Ken, you know, and to come back to you on that about conditions, and what conditions do you believe need to be in place for employers to recognise and invest in those micro-credentials as part of workforce development. I think we've talked about that a bit, but you know, we are the first country in Europe to have implemented a coherent national framework for microcredentials. We can use that really to our advantage, can't we?
Yeah, so you know what, I think we've kind of like addressed a lot of this in terms of like the conditions, the fundamentals are in place, right? But in terms of the courses that we're establishing, there needs to be clear business alignment. Like we need to be addressing the problems that they're facing. And I've mentioned kind of like from our perspective, Skillnet Ireland, we won't say these are the courses that we're going to deploy. We listen to industry needs. So once the microcredentials, there's clear alignment with them and there's clear business need. And we talked about that understanding of the return of investment kind of like nearly from day one when staff come back. I think it's really important to ensure, and this is why we've partnered with so many kind of like great universities, but is to ensure that there is quality assurance and credibility around the micro-credentials as well. Like as I said, from having worked in Trinity before, it's kind of like it's been an epic project for the past 5 or 6 years with Trinity, but with all the other institutions. Because I remember when microcreds were being discussed, kind of like way back when, it's like how are we going to do this? You know, the system's in place, but it was critical to get those institutions and institutions on board because of that credibility and because of the certification. And then I think the last point that I want to make, and it goes back to the 42% of SMEs in Ireland that just don't have the time. It is awareness and advocacy, and I know MicroCreds have done an incredible job in terms of creating that awareness. It's like on buses, on the radio, on kind of like it's like there's been a wonderful demonstration of our marketing campaign for them.
David mentioned the website as well, and I went online just to check it out. I ended up wanting to have the courses. It's great. It's really accessible, and it has the end user, the learner in mind, doesn't it? So all of that does make a difference in people feeling this is something I can access, I can do, and it's within a time block that suits me in my life.
I think we do need to kind of like as well look at the kind of like the end user stories as well and get better at telling, as like to Sean's point there as well, telling the stories of how it's changed the company's kind of like productivity and competitiveness, but also kind of like from individuals. We are, in my opinion, going through a golden age of disruption at the moment. You know, artificial intelligence is looming down. It's like that conversation has been happening. I'm sure there's people in the room here that I worked with 10 years ago when I was in IDA, that when we were looking at AI, we were talking about this 10 years ago. Actually, we didn't even have a clue what AI was. We didn't touch the tip of the iceberg 10 years ago when we started looking at a value proposition in IDA for around artificial intelligence. But now we're starting to see that disruption and destruction that's happening. And I think people are, and organizations are, it's like, okay, where do we go? How do we start? And how do we transition or ensure that we are transitioning in the right direction? So education is from my perspective, you know, it's like get on that kind of like journey, and MicroCreds is the perfect kind of like front door for kind of like for beginning that journey. And just one final point, years ago, again, when working in the Innovation and Entrepreneurial Hub in Trinity, it's amazing to see we would run, I see Vivian Patterson in the room as well, we'd run springboard programs, and it's amazing to see kind of like non-traditional learners, mature students come back into education, and maybe some of these people hadn't been in education for years and were intimidated and kind of like in the imposter syndrome. But my God, it was incredible to see after a short amount of time, the confidence, the joy of learning, the kind of like, you know, so if people if organizations and people kind of like take that first step, it does bear fruit from a confidence perspective within the individual, but also within the organization.
And people more likely to stay in those jobs. And of course, I think, you know, the research has shown that if somebody is in a job and you can upskill them, you get better value than hiring somebody new in that position. Orla, to come back to you and on a point there Ken was making about, you know, when you see people in the system and they are benefiting so much from it, how do you think higher education can better support adults and professional learners to convert those micro-credentials into, tangible career outcomes for themselves?
I think it's going to come back to what everyone said, is to tell the stories. So to tell the stories of the learner so that people can say, okay, well, I was an individual, I decided, I'm in a job, I don't really like it, I'd like to transition into sustainability, I'm interested in that, so I did a micro-credential, and then I had a career pivot or career change, and that was the impact it had for me. For someone who said, well, I was working in a company, I was kind of stuck at the level I was at, I went and I upskilled in a certain area, and that helped me get a promotion, or it helped me move into a different department. So it's telling those stories of career progressions and really showing it across. And you can see, if you look at the website, the range of micro-credentials there are, the range of sectors, as David said, over 600. So we've lots of different stories to tell, and I think as universities, it's important that we capture those, and we've done a lot through the testimonials, and David's done a great job in corralling us all to get testimonials, but it's been really, really important, and we continuously do that. And the learners want to share their stories. They want to tell us, this has really impacted on me, this has benefited me, I want to tell my story and share it with others, and that's really, really important. I also think it's important that from an employer perspective, Sean talked about helping them, is it understood what micro-credentials are and how they can impact and what they can offer a business? But it's also important for companies to embed micro-credentials in their talent and reward processes, so that they understand that if a member of one of their teams comes to them and says, I'd like to do a micro-credential, that employers can understand what that is, what impact it has, and that if it comes to like a promotion or a performance review, that they can understand that. And I think it's really important that that's embedded in, because I think you have to build it in now systematically and have it really recognised by industry and by employers as a very valuable learning opportunity. And as we said before, all of our micro-credentials are assessed. So it's not just somebody who said, I went and I did that piece of learning because I was interested. They've been assessed on it, they've been accredited on it. So there's something very tangible out of that. And as I said at the start, a lot of the learning is very applicable to the workplace. So they'll have shown through their assessment how they can apply it in their job.
From your experience, Orla, are employers increasingly aware of the micro-credentials programme and the difference it makes when an employee has that under their belt?
Yes, what we're seeing, and we can see this, and I'm sure all the other universities have had the same experience, in the 5 years of the programme at Trinity, we can look and see which employers are sponsoring learners to come on micro-credentials. And it was quite narrow at the start, and maybe cohorts coming from bigger companies, but we've done an awful lot of work, and David and the team have, and working with teams in Enterprise Ireland as well, to really broaden it out to the SME base. So when I look at even our semester 1 micro-credentials that we've just finished, the range of employers, the different sectors that are now engaging and sending their staff along, and even for individual learners coming along, the diversity of backgrounds now. So we're just at the start, and I think what's going to be very important for micro-credentials is as we move into the flexible learning pathways and we start to develop the ability to stack them towards awards is very important. So I think we've made a great start over the last 5 years, but micro-credentials are still maturing. And I think there's an onus on universities to continue that momentum and to continue the messaging out.
All right, a really strong point, I think, in which to end this discussion. Thank you to Ken, to Orla, and to Sean for their time today and sharing their very important and interesting insights. And I think the discussion has shown us the true impact of university-enterprise collaboration in addressing lifelong learning and those key upskilling needs that you've highlighted so well. So thank you all so much.